Morning. Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes. So I want to thank Brian for inviting me here. This is fabulous. I drove through this area 26 years ago when I first started to work. Went to work at then Techniques Development Lab. So 26 years ago, I'm back here. So it's great. I mean, I love. I was moving from Fort Collins to Silver Spring at the time, and I just love this area of the country and the people and so forth. So, and I want to thank Jesse and Jessica yesterday for the tabletop. That was fantastic. I got a real education, and at this point in my life, education is what I need. So that was really fabulous. So today I invite you to sort of sit back and take in a story that you may have not heard. I've given this talk a lot of times, but I'm going to start this off with a quote. So here it is. Alice started to her feet, and for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it. And burning with curiosity, Alice, burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and fortunately was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. So that's from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, and I read that because in our careers as scientists or whatever, sometimes we see a rabbit do something strange and pop down a rabbit hole. And the question you have to ask yourself is, are you going to follow that rabbit or not? And I would say that more times than not, I would suggest you follow that rabbit hole because you never know where that's going to take you, right? It's important that curiosity drives us as scientists because that is the motivation of our discipline. So this talk I have given almost some version of it almost every year since about 2003. I've given this talk to the Weather Service in Argentina, the Weather Service in Korea, the Weather Service in Taiwan. I've given it before 4 National Weather Service directors, 3 NOAA administrators. I've given it to local forecast offices. I've given it at conferences, NWA, AMS, etc., etc. So by going down a rabbit hole, I found that I just sort of hit upon this mother lode. And I'm still in the rabbit hole because this stuff I'm talking about here is just like a passion, and there's just a never-ending search to understand how culture impacts what we do. So let me proceed on. So the question is posed in this form. This is a chart of probability of tornado detection from warning metrics back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the question is, from agency, we want to improve these metrics, right? So in the case of probability detection, you want that to go up, and so the questions faced by the Weather Service is, well, how do we improve these metrics? Do we buy new technology? Do we have better science? That sort of thing, training, etc. What should we invest in? Similarly, tornado false alarm is another metric, and those same questions apply. So we started to look at, I started to look at these questions. And one of the things I thought to do was, well, these are averages for the entire Weather Service, all the offices aggregated. And, well, what about the top 10 offices? You know, where do they fall on this? And for probability of detection back in 2001, the asterisk, the green asterisk, represented the top 10 offices. And they're doing, slightly better in terms of probability of detection. But what you see here, these are the top 10 offices back in 2001 for false alarm ratio, and there's quite an amazing difference between the mean at the time and these offices. And so you say, well, that's really interesting. What's going on there? You all know quite well that false alarm rate or ratio is quite challenging because the penalty function for missing a tornado is really high, right? There's a lot of pressure not to miss a tornado, certainly not a violent tornado or a tornado that causes fatality. So the pressure is to issue more warnings than not. So to have an inordinately low false alarm rate is demonstration of some real skill because you have to run up against those pressures. So I said, well, that's quite amazing. So I said, maybe I'll talk to the MICs at these offices, try to figure out, are they doing something special? You know, what's going on that these officers are so much better on false alarm rate? And, you know, it was an interesting exercise. So you sort of posed the question, well, you know, Joe or Sally, you know, well, your office is doing fantastic. What's your secret? And they would come back and say, well, you know, this was surprising. I said, well, when I was a journeyman forecaster, I had the biggest SOB for MIC, and I vowed that if I ever became MIC, I would act differently. I would treat my employees better. I would not micromanage the warning operations, etc. So that was sort of the anti-lesson that they imparted on me. But a lot of them shared things about, well, I want my employees to feel like their job is fun, that they're encouraged to work, that they want to come to work, etc. So I got this kind of positive message from these MICs at these top 10 offices. We looked at other things too, like, well, are these offices all in Tornado Alley, where you get the big, big supercells, where the storms are well behaved? Well, the answer was no. Did they have access to more training? The answer was no. Did they get more tornadoes? Did they have more warnings? And the answer was no, 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 no. There was no clear signal. The offices were different places in the country, etc. So the question is, well, so what's driving this? And then the thought was to look at, maybe there's something going on in the culture of these offices that promotes, after all, human beings, forecasters who issue tornado warnings. It's not automated, right? So, and we work in teams, and teams have to get along, and teams have to communicate well, and teams have to respect each other. And is there something in these offices that that all these ingredients come together so that they work as a team, and they make good decisions, and they share ideas, and there's this idea of respect, etc. So first looking at the things which are sort of common to weather service culture in all offices has been shown before, that they're sort of like family units. They're isolated from other offices, relatively homogeneous with gender, ethnicity, and age. This has probably changed over the years. I think we're getting more diverse, certainly from a gender standpoint. Lots of experience. This probably hasn't changed. Lots of people with 10, 25 years of experience. We have a union. And there's a high value placed on science and technology and a real dedication to mission. These are characteristics, bar none. Every office sort of shares these things. Well, what about the different, beyond that, what's different? So that's the question, right? So we have all these offices, everybody's issuing tornado warnings, but they're different. If you walk into one, and many of you have done this, gone from one office to another, it's not the same, right? There's different things, there's different environments, there's different ways that people interact from office to office. So the question is, does that impact the performance on our sort of mission activities or mission responsibilities? And so we sort of have almost like a laboratory, if you will, in a social science arena, because we have the offices doing ostensibly the same thing, but with different people in different groups, right? So there's this idea of group culture, which incorporates traditions and practices that are tied to background knowledge, common values, group goals, status systems. It also serves as a space where new cultural items are performed. This is a quote from Gary Fine. He's a professor at Northwestern University who studied group cultures in all different professions, etc. And I'll get to him a little bit more. He spent some time embedded in the Weather Service, and he wrote a book about us, right? So this is it. This is the air you breathe in your office. The unwritten rules, the traditions. When somebody leaves, what kind of celebration do you have? When somebody achieves something, what do you do? The unwritten rules, right, that exist in each office. So the methodology for me to look into this was back in 2000 and 2001. I got tornado warning statistics for the offices, and I ranked them all by skill, and I requested, there was a survey, kind of like the FEV survey, it was called SFA, some of you may remember this, and I requested aggregate reports from the top 10 and bottom 10 offices in tornado warning performance, and I compared them to look for differences. Now, I honestly thought I would see very little difference. I thought, when the stuff's hitting the fan at whatever the office is, that they're going to step up and do well in their tornado warnings regardless. The hypothesis, though, is the tornado warning is arguably the most challenging of the products that are issued by forecasters. The sustained high performance requires a highly trained, dedicated staff who work well as a team, people under very stressful conditions, right? Sometimes you find yourself issuing warnings for areas where your own family may be in the path of disaster. So it's quite stressful. So if the effects of culture could be seen, it would be in the tornado warning statistics. So the idea was that offices that score high in tornado warning verification would also score high in employee satisfaction as measured through these survey questions, like FEVs or whatever, which is kind of a proxy for culture, right? So that's the idea. So here were just some basic results. So these are actual questions from the SFA. The green shows the top 10 in warning performance. This is back in 2002, I think. And then red is the bottom 10 performers. So the question was, is there trust between employees and my immediate supervisor? And you can see that the top 10 offices felt much more favorably about this than the bottom 10. In the middle is the Weather Service as a whole. How would you rate the extent to which management treats you with respect and dignity? You can see in the top 10 offices they felt much better about that than the bottom. Here's another example. Communication. Management promotes effective communication amongst different work groups and gave me same signal. So I just looked question after question. There were over 100 questions on the survey. The same thing stood out. I said, like, holy cow, there is something here. You know, what is going on? You know, this. So we decided to do a rigorous statistical study now. So we looked at 50 offices, and offices that were excluded west of the Rockies, as well as offices that had fewer than 5 tornado events in that time, and those who had fewer than 5 employees fill out the survey. So we tossed all of those. We had 50 offices left. We looked at CSI as an index for skill. We looked at sick leaves per month per employee, and we looked at employee satisfaction through the survey. We controlled for various variables: employee tenure, education level in the office, number of employees at each site, geography, number of tornado events, F-scale of the tornadoes. Other influence, technology and training, we kind of viewed those were about the same. Most offices have the same radars, the same AWIPs, that kind of thing. And so here's the basic question. So you see this bell-shaped distribution of skill across the offices. So where poor performance is down here for CSI and up here. So the question is, how can you explain this? So we did. So here were the results. One set. So out of 149 questions, 131 or 88% were positively correlated to CSI for tornado warning. So it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So the null hypothesis of a random relationship between satisfaction and CSI could be rejected with an enormous amount of confidence. Of the 18 correlations that were negative, none were significant at the 0.05 level. The 131 were positive, 27 were significant at the 0.05 level. So this is like knocked our socks off. There really is something going on here. So we looked at, we did a regression analysis, and we found that actually we could explain the variance by there was 54% we don't know. We don't know. There's other stuff going on, but of these cultural variables, 20% was actually explained by the sick leave. In other words, offices that had anomalously high sick leave performed worse than offices that had anomalously low. And then 3 questions from the SFA. So they were performance appraisal on schedule, are there accommodations for the disabled, and I know the process for voicing a complaint through the union. So they say, what? Those questions were the most highly correlated with tornado warning performance, but that's what it was. So the survey, we worked with the vendor of this survey who'd done survey research for like 30 years, and so they explained that when people answer these kind of questions, it is not like explicitly reading the question. It's at a gut level. So a lot of times these things are indicative of sort of almost like subliminal stuff. So maybe performance appraised on schedule is that there's a respect for the employee management relationship to actually schedule a performance review on time. Accommodations for the disabled may be a sort of an indicator of the receptivity to diversity and folks with disabilities. Knowing the process for voicing a complaint through the union may be an indicator of a good or not good relationship between the union steward and management in a particular office, which you all know is really important for good relations. So, so this was quite interesting. So I continued digging, right? So when we looked at the questions in general and tried to draw some sort of a picture of this so that it would get people's attention, and what came out is sort of characteristics of a high-performance culture and a low-performance culture. So the high-performance culture is characterized by, sort of flexible policies and procedures, teamwork, open communication, focus on performance, goals set and tracked, strong customer orientation, emphasis on innovation, trust and respect, good relations with the union. Put that all together. Now this is idealized. There is no office that does 100% in all these things, but you're going to get more highly accurate warnings and lower sick leave in the office. On the other extreme, if you got rigid policies, unresolved conflict, climate of fear, intimidation, lack of empowerment, poor sense of goals, lack of customer focus, resistance to change, ignorance of diversity issues, and poor relations, you put all that together and you're going to get sort of the opposite. And again, there's no office that hits all these negative indicators as well, but you get the picture, right? So which office are you in, right? Probably, is it somewhere, somewhere in the middle, I guess. Hopefully more towards the good side. So this is kind of what comes out of this. And so one of the ideas I'll get to a little bit more is that the culture, we all own the culture. It's not just the MIC or the management team or the union steward or whatever. The culture is owned by everybody in the work group, right? So we're all sort of responsible for it, and we all have an influence on it. We're all a part of it. So you have a chance to influence this if you choose to take a step in that direction. So what we did then to look at this, so this is a CSI trend line, and the Weather Service had like a goal this was again back in 2001 to improve, and we created something called the Culture Index. So what we did was we just combined, we looked at the offices that scored, we just created this index on those 3 questions. We didn't look at the sick leave for this. And then we said, okay, we'll rank the offices based on nothing else but this culture index and see how well the top offices in the culture index do on tornado performance. And what we saw was that the top third of the WFOs on the culture index were way up here above the national average. So they had already met the 2007 goal for tornado warning performance. So you just say, again, what? How is this possible? You just take, you're telling me, and I have to say this to myself, you're telling me that if I just looked at offices that scored high on these 3 questions, I could predict which offices would do well in tornado warning performance. I said, you're out of your mind, right? But it's true. Actually, it is true. And conversely, the offices that were low on here, they were below the goal and below the national average. So I said, this is kind of amazing. So decided to go back in time and go forward in time since then, right? So this was the study. This was the top 10, or top 1/3 back in 2002, and the bottom, and you can see for CSI there was huge difference. So I went back and I took those top third and went back in time and forward in time all the way to as recently as 2016, and you can see that over this whole 20-year period that these offices who had registered, granted it's just a snapshot back in 2002, this is what we'll talk about more, they continue to perform well all this time, so there's something, these cultures don't just form and disappear, they're enduring, right? And those of you who've been around or have moved around probably have experienced this. So what's interesting is that if you look at POD, there's not a hell of a lot of difference. In fact, there's some years where the bottom 10 do better, or sort of the bottom third do better than the top third, again on this culture index. But what really stands out is the false alarm rate. So over this entire period, the bottom third on the culture index, did demonstrably better in false alarm rate over that entire time. So, when I first started working for the Weather Service and was interested in tornado warnings, people would tell me, well, false alarm rate, the folks, the EMs and so forth, they said just, we prefer to get warned, overwarned, it's not a big deal. If we don't really care about false alarm rate that much, just let us know whenever there's a problem. So I'm going to get back to this some more, but so then 2016 came along, and this is, if you do things long enough, you get rewarded. There was this, like I said, Louis reorganized the Weather Service, and he created an Office of Organizational Excellence. Well, it sounds like a really stupid name, but let's just put that aside. But they're good folks working in there, and they set out and they hired McKinsey to do an organizational health index assessment. So they did that, and I got a hold of those statistics, and I sort of repeated the exercise in 2016. And so I took the bottom 1/3 and the top third on this OHI, as they call it, and repeated it, and you can it's not as strong of a signal, but it's a second data point of measuring the culture back in now 2016. So I got 2 data points, 2020, 2002 and 2016, and you still see that, right? So it's the culture drifts, it changes somewhat, but basically an independent measurement of the culture from wide periods still shows that signal. So getting back to the false alarm rate, so here's the assessment from Joplin, 2011, it was mentioned just in the icebreaker. The report said, while there are no guarantees that simply decreasing false alarms will significantly impact warning response behavior, the results of the Joplin resident interviews appear to indicate a relationship between perceived false alarms, degree of warning credibility, and complacency. So the Joplin report sort of felt that there may be an issue with too many false alarms. And then Simmons and Sutter wrote a book about this. This is an AMS publication, and we also found evidence of a false alarm effect as a higher recent local false alarm rate significantly increases fatalities and injuries. So this is saying, well, wait a minute, I thought we didn't have to worry about false alarm rate too much because, it's better to overwarn than underwarn. But Joplin sort of appeared to indicate that there was that might not be true. So what I did is I looked at, took the same thing of the culture index, and I looked at fatalities in these offices, groups of offices over this 20-year period, and I threw out the 2011 because that was so anomalous in terms of fatalities. But basically, the top 10 or top third over this 20-year period, the fatalities per year was 7 versus 29 for the bottom on this culture index. So it's not a causal relationship necessarily, but it's certainly suggestive that there could be a nexus between false alarm rate and fatalities and so forth present, which may have partially due to this cultural factor, right? So that's kind of the story in a nutshell. That yes, how we interact with one another, doing our mission critical activities, and the culture that we exist in can actually impact a lot of things. So this is a book I encourage you to read. This is Gary Allen Fines. He spent like 3 years sitting in Weather Service forecast offices and describing the culture. He talks about the Plainfield disaster, 1991 I think that was, the F5 that hit Plainfield, Illinois, unwarned, as sort of like the Weather Service's Challenger shuttle example, that a toxic culture in that office resulted in a huge disaster. People died as a result. So this was sort of our cultural failure, you could say. But he says, I argue that any orientation towards science and work is created by groups and their shared past. Local conditions matter. Local conditions matter. Group cultures influence standards of occupational practice. Different cultures have distinct effects even when the tasks are ostensibly similar, or in the case of tornado warnings, they're exactly the same. Every office issues tornado warnings the same way. Now, how they do it and their reasoning and all that is different. And group cultures reverberate long after the original participants have departed. So you can have forecasters come in and out, you can have MICs come in and out, but the culture persists, usually. It takes some change. So this is a paradox, is that, well, the culture doesn't change, then why should I bother trying to change it, right? So conclusions, local forecast culture has a significant impact on warning performance. Not the only thing, but it's certainly influenced. Culture of high performance is during the top tercile of WFOs, the culture index have a lower mean annual tornado warning. FAR experience fewer tornado fatalities within their CWAs in the bottom tercile. So let me just quickly get to some thoughts on culture and change. So why do work groups culture endure, and why is change sometimes slow? Well, work group culture is determined solely by the participants. Everybody in a work group must accept responsibility for it. Only work group members can change it. Nobody can force you, nobody outside your work group can force you to change your culture. No, I can't come in and say, oh, okay, WFL, whatever, you need to change your culture this way or that way. It doesn't work that way. Defining and assessing the baseline of culture is difficult. So targeting change to baseline culture requires consensus. Cultural change must be mediated via work group relationships. Work group leaders, official and informal, must be role models of the targeted change. So you have to sort of stand up and say, okay, if I want my culture to be different, then I have to be a role model for what I want. And this is a big, work group cultures may be comfortable with their baseline culture even if they recognize the need to change. So it is hard to change this stuff. So you get used to working with Fred or Sally, and you've come to terms with working with Fred and Sally. So you don't want to throw that relationship. You've worked hard. You may hate that person's guts, but you have worked hard to establish a relationship, and now you're going to tell me I need to change that relationship? Good luck with that, right? So it's hard to change a culture, even if you want to. It's hard to change a relationship we have developed and come to terms with over time. So can you change a culture? All right, so I say yes, you can. But you got to be deliberate about it. Recognize that every work group has a culture. Examine the rituals, customs, tradition, practices of your group. How do these relate to your shared beliefs and values? And can you modify these things so that they promote a high performance culture, right? So you can look and say, okay, we do these things. This is how we onboard a new person, and this is, or how do you speak about, the things? What are the messages you're sending, and can you change? Sometimes tweaking things makes a huge difference. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll open up for any questions you might have. But I must say that, like, I'm a supervisor. I've been a supervisor for 20 years or so, and I work a lot on this with my my work group back in MDL, and now the entire lab, because I have seen the benefits of this. It's like my goal as a supervisor, I want to get the most out of my employees. So I have found that if they are happy, they like to come to work, they're going to be more innovative, they're going to do more than I ask of them, etc. So I work a lot to try to make sure that people feel respected, etc. But it's a constant thing. I mean, you really have to. But it's a pay me now, pay me later proposition, right? If you don't invest in it, you're gonna see bad stuff crop up, and you're gonna deal with the cleanup job when something happens, right? So you can say, all right, well, I don't need to pay attention to this, but you will have to pay attention when something that, what it might be, you have no idea, but bad things will happen if you don't pay attention to it. So I'll stop there and take any questions. Anybody got any questions?
Did you notice on some of the high-performing offices, does outreach play a part in it? With the communication with emergency managers and the media and things like that?
Customer focus is a characteristic of these offices. So how that is mediated through, but yes, the answer is yes. I will. Okay, now you want to turn off the camera? No. All right. So I will say I don't normally do this, but I will say that WFO Goodland is in the top on the culture index. So I'll just say that. I'll just say that. Okay. So good job, Goodland. Yes.
I have two that kind of go hand in hand. It's like one to follow it, but have you seen any correlation between like a culture that is positive amongst the staff, but negative from the management? Like maybe there was a changeover in the...
Yeah, so I don't have a way to examine that systematically, but I have heard this from a number of offices where they said, oh, well, we had this, and then our MIC retired, we got somebody else, and they weren't quite like our good old beloved MIC, and things started to go downhill, right? I will say, okay, I didn't talk about the sick leave. So the sick leave, the most positive correlates to sick leave is focused around the management team and the MIC specifically. So if people feel really good about their MIC, then they tend to, the offices have lower sick leave, and vice versa. So the management team has a super role in that particular aspect. Now that's, okay, the survey research group that I worked with, this has long been hypothesized, this relationship between sick leave and other factors, but they had never seen it in statistics until they saw the Weather Service. And his question was, why does it show up in the Weather Service? And they look at private sector stuff, they didn't see it. And one of the hypotheses is that you got scheduling annual leave has to be done way in advance in the Weather Service forecast offices because of the, so you can't just say, I don't feel well because I either hate my job or I hate my boss, or I'm literally sick because of my job. The only option you have on short term is sick leave, right? You can't just take annual leave. So that was one of the thoughts that why the sick leave correlation shows up in Weather Service, where these survey researchers had not seen it. So to answer your question, I don't have a way to dig into that particular question because this. But it seems to be from hearing other folks that it is important. John?
Great talk. It's interesting to see a lot of this stuff put to numbers like scientists like to see it. So this is great. And as we mentioned to you yesterday, the Tornado Warning Improvement Project in Central Region did a survey that had similar questions. We found similar things. So my question to you is, you say you've given this then to a lot of the leaders at the very top, and in this age of pounding your fist on the table and that sort of thing, have you seen a concerted effort to address this at the very highest level?
Well, so that's a really good question, and not until recently. So, but 2014, Louis and Company, they created this OOE office, and they put under their portfolio culture as part of it. So for the first time in all this time, there are some FTEs in Weather Service who are working, and Brian's a beneficiary of this. They had a cultural team through the NRAP program, and now like I said, with the FEVS thing, there's an attempt to try to take and have local action plans, if you will, at the local level based on that to kind of get at this. So that has turn things around. So you wait long enough and pray, I suppose, some things can systematically come into play. So I waited a long time, but now Mary Erickson and Louis are definitely they're promoting this. So I think we have an opportunity. But really, there's nothing preventing local offices or regions to go run with this ball right now, right? So I think things have definitely improved.
Again, just echo John's comments, great talk. When you looked at the snapshots between 2002 and 2016 on the data, did you see any crossover between offices that were in both sets of data in the top third, for example? So maybe looking at them as a model for...
Yeah, I did. I haven't dug... There are a few offices that flipped. They went from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top, and I thought I haven't had the time to dig down into what was going on there. There is evidence, like there's the evidence of drift. Some offices start well and maybe start declining for whatever reason, but there appear to be some cases where there's a flip, like it could be an MIC change from good to not so good, or I don't know. But I intend to dig deeper on that. I mean, but the goals, I think, when I show those, like idealized, I think it's pretty safe to say, because those kind of cultural characteristics show up and are recommended in private sector, no matter what the business is, that if we were to focus on those, you couldn't go very wrong in trying to improve in those basic things right now, right? But it's an interesting question. I mean, the offices are small, right? And now I wonder if our culture is going to become more enduring with the 12 to 5 thing, as people may be moving even less, right? There's going to be less turnover, so either the good cultures have stayed longer, or maybe the not so good. But yeah. Other question.
Did you do any statistics on, or have future to do any statistics on other products besides tornadoes?
We looked at the time, like flash flood warnings and winter warnings and so forth. So the signal's there, it's just not as strong as with tornado warnings. So I think it's a reasonable assumption that offices that do well in tornado warnings are probably going to do well in most everything, because there's sort of this commitment. A big part of this is a commitment to excellence, I would say, beyond anything else. There does appear to be some offices where the emphasis on like improvement and doing better is not where it needs to be. So sort of stepping up to that is I think another challenge for offices, is just, hey, we can get better, we need to get better, let's get to the business of getting better. I mean, another theory I have is sort of on the bad end of the spectrum, offices that are just sort of involved with unresolved conflict for a long, long time. They're dealing with their conflict. They don't have time to focus on the new things, the innovations, implementing those into operations, because they're fighting all the time, right? It's sort of that, and so they lag. They're like the tail end of the culture. Whereas the offices who are, they're on firing all cylinders, they get along and they're happy. They take that new idea, they put it into operations, and they're already seeing the benefits. So they're like the leading edge of stuff, because they have this cultural oil that's lubricating all that performance stuff, because they're really doing well. So I think that's at play as well.
So to follow up with what you were just saying, spurred a thought. So do you think that the bottom 10 could potentially be a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for feeling pressure to perform better, especially when you're talking about, some of these performance indexes? Do you think that maybe there's that pressure from management to perform better, and they're almost kind of cracking the whip a little bit to where it just harbors a little more resentment or worse?
I think that could come into play. I mean, I've heard that. So, yeah, you can't. So, many of you may have already experienced this scenario in your careers. I've been, I'm 26 years with weather service. So where the new guy comes in, and it's like he's Mr. Fix-It. He comes in from the Navy or the Air Force or who knows where. And this worked when I was here, and okay, this is the way we're doing things now, and imposes their will and their style on everybody. Bad decision. That doesn't work, right? Rarely works. It may work short term. This is being recorded, so I will stop what I was about to say. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think that's a particularly used now. So, but it could be you want to emphasize that, but you got to have some skill, right? So this is why part of this motivation was to show why we need to have training and leadership and management and diversity and you name it, all these sort of soft social skills that managers need to have in order to be adept at doing these things, right? It's not, and the scientists can be taught. I was taught, I was a pretty stupid, I don't know, just talk to my wife, right? So she thanks the fact that I get involved in this research, let me put it that way. So people who can improve, supervisors can improve, line forecasters can improve. That's the good news, right? It's not, but yeah, a draconian kind of like, okay, you got to be this instead of that. That probably is not good.
Yeah, I just want to say it was a good talk too. I noticed your pie chart there was like there was that 54% that was unknown. I was kind of curious, would that be kind of like outside factors, forecasters and management, maybe like their home life or stuff that's going on in their life that could bleed into work? I sometimes would call it forecasting the forecaster. Sometimes you just don't really know what mood they're going to be in until they get there, and that might be outside influences. So I don't know if that played a part, or if you're just focusing strictly on the work environment itself.
It's unknown, right? I mean, that's where the speculation plays in. I mean, I have heard also people who've moved from office to office, and they've said, I worked in this office, and they're really good at tornado warnings, and what I saw was there was this like camaraderie, people watched out for one another, their families, their home life, so it was a real like kind of supportive WFO environment, and then they went to someplace else, the warnings were not so good, and then he found like kind of cold, people were not engaged as supportive kind of thing. So that could be at play as well. It gets to the culture question. But it could be other stuff, right? We have to be honest and say, okay, this is impressive, but it's not the whole picture, right? There are other things that are at play. We looked at tornado climatology, and you see a little signal there, but it's not that strong, and so forth. So the project you all have been involved with, I think I saw it. AMS a couple annual meetings ago about update on that. I'm interested to know where it's at, and what if some of those things have been implemented. Because I know there was an effort, and the culture group was also, I think Frank Alzheimer was looking at this. So yeah.
Question, I'm going to piggyback off of your question regarding the unknown. I was wondering if there would be any way to assess office staffing levels and its effect on the culture. I've seen offices, I've been in an office where we started out fully staffed and then went down 5 or 6 people, and I watched the office culture change dramatically. And I was wondering if you had any way to gauge that at all in terms of your
I could, if I had the time, I could take a look at that. I know that's an issue, and I know that's probably exacerbated the sick leave thing. As well. So that undoubtedly has come into play. Whether it is sort of hit, I would like to believe that the offices that were doing well in culture probably handled that problem better. Maybe it impacted their statistics somewhat negatively, but I haven't done it, but we could, yeah.
Fortunately, we need to get moving. So is there any one more question? I would like to add that Rob Cox and myself, we were on the culture team for the OEE, and it was actually outstanding. And I would actually piggyback on what Dr. Smith said. When you talk about change, if anybody remember a couple years ago, I asked Chris Strager, have we brought in change management to do it? And I would say, if you're a manager and you think, and there might, and we are having changes, the 5 to 12 changes. There's actually about 5 or 6 models. There's an AdCard model, Cisco model, GE model that actually can help you manage change. And I would highly recommend look at these models if you're at your office and see if you can implement them, because I think it will correlate if you feel like you have a culture issue. It might correlate with each other. So look at some change management models if you want to. If you feel like the conflict issue, Dr. Smith talked about that you can maybe find a model that might fit your office and try to implement it and see because it's going to help you manage the change. Okay, and I think that will correlate too. Okay. Well, if you have any more questions for Dr. Smith,
I'll be around all day. I'll be at the banquet, so just come up if you want to talk about it more. I got plenty of time, so I'd love to talk about it.
Well, let's give Dr. Smith.